Welcome everybody to Frank Analysis. My name is Franco and I'm joined today by my friends D. Pierce SSC, host of his own channel D. Pierce SSC, and Dak Rulo, host of his own channel Dak Rulo. Both of them you can find at overwritten.org. They publish very interesting articles over there. I'll have that all linked in the description. Today we're going to talk about what we would like to see change in our education system. For me, in my list of priorities, I have election integrity, number one, because without that, how are we going to change any policies that we want done if we don't have a real democracy? Number two, I have getting money out of politics so that the corporations don't have such a stranglehold on our electoral system. And number three, I would have education, because that is a big investment for the future of our society. So I want to ask you guys first, where would you rank education in your priority list?
Yeah, I'll go first. If I had a top three, top five, the first things I think about are changing like American foreign policy, debt-free college and healthcare, UBI, getting money out of politics. Education, though, I would say it's high on my priority list. I don't know where it is in the top 10, but the system that we have now, it can jokingly be called an education system. I think it's a social conditioning system. It kind of it's trying to turn you into a particular kind of American. Mm-hmm. We're speaking like just about America, right?
We'll get into that.
I don't think that what the education system is doing right now is making us individuated individuals, like mm-hmm. Academy of Ideas, a YouTube channel that I really like, has said. I think it's more turning us into like collectivized workers. And me personally, I would say that it makes you afraid to leave the conformity circles that surround all of us.
Yeah, you want to add to that, Dak?
I would rather just subtract the education system from the United States because it's such an embarrassment. One of the big issues is that we all understand the issues with the funding for our so-called schools. We know that that's a joke. We know that in Detroit, many of the school districts are unable to hold classes on Friday because of a lack of funds, yet somehow there's enough money to renovate the Detroit Pistons arena. So we understand those issues, and I can leave that to more intelligent writers like Chris Hedges to explain in greater detail. But one of the issues I've seen, I actually tried to go for a teaching degree some time ago, and when I was even dumber than I am now, and I could see right away that there was absolutely no hope in the teaching field because they really set up every kind of possible barrier to prevent people from becoming teachers. The idea that you would need a master's degree in a system that does not have publicly subsidized colleges or tuition-free colleges. The idea that you would need to acquire something like that before going into a field that pays very, very poorly is obviously providing a massive disincentive for people to become teachers. Then when you get into the classroom, you see that everything that could go wrong with the curricula is going wrong. And I saw that even my former high school has decayed rapidly since I graduated 10 years ago. And it is in large part because of the decisions that the administration has been making. And it's even worse in the larger schools. Anybody who really thinks that anything of value is taking place in high schools really ought to spend a couple of days doing some teaching observation periods, as I did, because there is no greater way to convince somebody to commit suicide.
Yeah, and with the funding, we all know here that it's definitely a problem. We have schools, the education level depends on how much the neighborhood or the community can pay in taxes. So there's all these people that are born into a poor community get robbed from an education because of something that's not even their fault, just because of where they were born. Also, to add what you guys were saying is that we need to stop teaching kids in the current method of just having them memorize stuff. We need to move away from just memorization and into wisdom building and discovery. Instead of teaching people what to think and what to believe, we need to teach them how to think. Schools need to be more exploratory. We need to allow students to have more choices from an early age to discover what it is they want to do in life, and then allow them to discover their life purpose on their own early on, and then the schools can have separate programs with different paths. Like if a student finds art more interesting at an early age than solving math problems, they can move towards that direction. Not all kids are equally passionate about all subjects, so we need to let them have more freedom of choice about what subjects they want to learn. What do you think, Pierce?
So I think that we can try to game out what this kind of perfect system that all three of us could think about. We can try to game that out a little bit later. I think a more interesting question would be, what would we want from an actual education system? Like, this is making more virtuous, more individuated humans, as opposed to people that are just scared of being wrong and people that are just going to be collectivized workers. And yeah, like Dak said, I would take education out of the current system that we have, and I don't know, just call it the system. I think it would be better served at this point to just make schooling like more physical, more about the body, because I don't think that we're doing it. I don't think that we're doing it right when it comes to developing these kids' minds. I think there's a lot of babysitting, and again, I think it's like a kind of conditioning system, a social conditioning system that's not making like our children, the kids in our society, necessarily like be free thinkers. I think it's kind of actually narrowing that space. So yeah, I mean, I think it'd be better served at this point to just turn the education system into some place where at least the kids are getting more of a workout instead of sitting down all day and being told what is right and what is wrong. Franco, you mentioned an interesting point. You were talking about how do kids figure out what it is that they on their own like are interested in. I think that kids could figure that out on their own with the internet. You don't have to have a system to tell like kids what they're interested in. They can figure that out on their own. I think like if you have a public education system, something like math is like a track that everyone can follow, and it's kind of like a known factor. And maybe don't try to teach such like crazy subjects and just maybe do like math and like sports. Like I don't know. What do you think, Dak? Like,
yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you brought up the fact that the schools need to actually put some physical education in there. Hitler agreed with that, by the way. So did Plato. But no, the thing is, I don't know about anything except English. I am completely idiotic on literally every other subject in human history. If I had, and that was the problem, was pursuing my passion in college is precisely why I couldn't find a job in my field. If I'd been more intelligent, I would have gone to school to be a veterinarian or something, specializing in treating tarantulas. But the thing is that with the English department, what I have seen in there that is such a spectacular failure is the fact that the teachers themselves know absolutely nothing about the subjects they teach. These are the kinds of people who did not read 1984 and Lord of the Flies when they were in high school because they thought it was boring, so they just wrote some nonsense on their tests and got away with it. And then they went to college and they found out that they weren't really instructed to read too many good books. And so these people who are completely illiterate in the field of literature are now teaching English. I don't know if it's that bad in all of the other fields. Again, I'm completely uninformed on those subjects, so I can't speak intelligently about them. But I do know that the English field is embarrassing. They have a system now in many, many schools where the students are not required, they're not assigned any texts that they have to read against their own will. They get to choose the books that they read. So how on earth can they acquire a classical education in literature if they are not instructed and compelled to read certain books? They need some kind of guidance. Otherwise, the teacher is basically just, as Pierce mentioned, a glorified babysitter, which is precisely what the corporate state desires. The corporate state wants teaching to be more of an automated profession, one thing that literally anybody can do. That way you can reduce the pay scale, you can reduce the competitiveness of the unions, you can do a million other terrible things besides as you bastardize education. That's the direction in which we're heading. I mean, if you think people are stupid now, wait and see what the next generation, wait to see what comes out of their mouths. It's going to be pretty nightmarish.
And a quick bounce off of that, so South Korea, for example, they have a phrase. It's something like king, father, teacher. I think it goes like king, teacher, father. It's supposed to be like this like glorification of the father. But the fact that they have teacher in there with king and father, it kind of shows you how high certain cultures place the instructors, of their children. And in like certain Scandinavian countries, I think it's like, Sweden, Finland, whatever, like some of those countries, those people are revered in society as just as good as doctors. But yeah, like Dex says, they're relegated to babysitters in America because we don't actually value education. I mean, if people actually think that like their kids are getting smarter, this is the only, all right, and I'll close by saying this is the only function that I think the education system is serving right now. It is putting kids next to each other, like, you know, you're in your peer group. I have constantly thought about the fact that I am definitely going to homeschool my kid, but it's like I want them to get that social element, and I don't know, I guess I'll throw them in like a jiu-jitsu gym or something, but I'm trying to think like what replaces that social kind of connection, like just kids being around each other. I think that is good, but the education system is not.
I'll add that Japan also reveres their teachers a lot too, and they put them at the level of doctors and lawyers. And also, you guys brought up a good point of teaching more physical education. Let the students know their body more, have them be more healthy. Also teach them about nutrition. What are certain foods that are good for them? Which ones are likely for them to develop certain allergies over time and autoimmune diseases? They don't teach that to us now. In addition to that, they could teach us meditation. They could teach us yoga, about spirituality, so that we can understand ourselves better, understand our life purpose, understand one another better, as opposed to what we're seeing now with this tribalism happening, because people don't understand each other. Yeah, go ahead, Pierce.
And just to bounce off what you said, because I love it, you are more your body than your brain. Not everyone can be a smart person. Not everyone can be like a brain thinker person, but everyone has to worry about their health. And it's your meat vehicle. You're in it all the time. It should be squared away.
You can't educate people on that, because then if you educate people on that, they're going to realize that there's a lot of problems in American society. They're going to ask questions about why McDonald's is such a powerful corporation. They're going to ask questions about why PepsiCo is such a powerful corporation. They're going to ask questions about the agricultural industry in general. They're going to question the animal agricultural industry. There is a reason why they don't want people to be educated in this society, and it's not some sinister conspiracy theory. It is a matter of facilitating the corporate state. As I mentioned earlier, the embarrassingly limited standards of teachers' abilities and knowledge, that is a direct reflection of what the state desires. The state desires mediocrity. It's why people who read are such a minority in this society. So obviously the education system is a reflection of the agenda of the powers that be.
I want to hear what your thoughts are on standardized testing. Who wants to go first?
Not very positive. I mean, I never took the SATs. I never took an honors English class. The idea of a standardized test, I remember when I was going into community college, I had to take a test to determine my placement, and on my math examination, I guessed on about 80% of the questions, and by some weird roll of the dice, it turned out that most of my answers were correct, and so they tried to place me in a higher up mathematics class. When I explained that I had basically just BS'd my way through it, they told me, no, these tests are designed to weed that out. Well, apparently they don't work very well, and so I don't understand it. Like, you would have to prove the objective value of the content that the test covers, and nobody has been able to do that. Standardized testing is intended to elevate math and science, because in this increasingly technocratic society, we have this myth that those things are going to save us. It obviously does absolutely nothing to account for any of the other fields, which is precisely, it's a reflection of the values of the administration. The administration does not see a need to fund other subjects such as English and art or gymnastics, and the standardized testing doesn't account for that. Go ahead, Pierce.
I don't really know where I would stand on standardized testing. I actually have a high opinion on math. But standardized testing has been so demonized that I'm wondering if I should question, my own thoughts on it. I think that you kind of have to measure kids, but also it's like you don't want to have a system where everyone's forced to climb a tree, but maybe not every kid is an animal that's made to climb a tree. So I'm going to say that my thoughts on standardized testing aren't necessarily fully formed. I will say though, just kind of as an aside, the way that schools are set up, it's kind of like a hub and then you have corridors, and in those corridors they lead to rooms, and what do you call it? In those rooms, you have a teacher in the front of the classroom, and there are kids like in that room, and it's like it just feels very industrialized, right? Like life is getting to a point where, and bear with me here, but it just feels like such a mechanical way of like pushing kids through a system where it's like, you know, you have the corridors and the rooms and everyone's just like listening to the teacher. It's like, I feel like it's not natural. And when I was listening, a good channel on this particular topic is Academy of Ideas, who I mentioned earlier. He has videos titled like, you know, how the public school system and mainstream media ruin us. He has one specifically about the education system, and in the one that's specifically about the education system, he talks about how the model that the United States has is based off of a Prussian model, where the Prussians were trying to make their civilians kind of as robotic and just trying to make them collectivized workers, and that's the model that we chose to take. And you know, I don't know if the West, if we all follow this Prussian model of like industrially like pushing humans through a system and making sure that they're obedient and just ready to get to work. But yeah, you can't call that an education system. That is like, I mean, you're getting educated on how to function in a society that isn't, you know, functioning optimally for your self-development. It's more pushing you through the system, like Dak says, so that you can, you know, perpetuate the existence of the state, kind of a thing. So I hope that wasn't too jumbled, but what you said, that's just like with the testing and all that, it just made me think about the way that schooling is structured. And I'm wondering if we can't just do more organic things, be out more in nature, assign these kids lifelong mentors instead of shuffling them through like teachers that like aren't going to care about any individual. And the last thing I'll say is like all of my favorite teachers, I had this discussion more or less with them, and I was young, so I'm thankful that I was smart enough to be able to kind of ask them this kind of thing. I was like, how do you feel like just every year, like, and they talk about how they miss their favorite students, and you know, that kind of love, having to recycle that favorite love, that love to your favorite students. I'm just wondering if it would be better served to, you know, integrate teachers more into people's lives instead of just making them just teach everyone like every single year, new students. This is very industrial to me. It seems very inorganic. It doesn't seem like a community. It seems like a factory.
Yeah. Also, like I mentioned about how spirituality, teaching that in school and also teaching things like yoga and meditation can help with understanding one another. This is also going to help with people finding their own biases that they have towards other races and other genders. And I think another thing that can bolster that is if we have required study abroad programs where you go live in another community, in another country. And I'm not saying like if you live in a rich community in, I don't know, Beverly Hills, and then you go to like London where things aren't much different. I mean, going to a country, a third world country where you see and of like another ethnicity and see how that community lives, and then you start to see you start to understand other cultures better, and in addition to that, you start to get to know the natural world of that environment as well. What is the ecosystem like there? The trees, the animals are going to be completely different. You start to understand certain elements in biology when you travel to other places. So I want to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Well, obviously, again, that completely contradicts what the corporate state desires. The corporate state does not want people to break out of these arbitrary political borders and see what's going on across the fence. Rose McGowan was recently doing an interview with Afshin Rattanzi, and she talked about how America is a cult because you are told that the rest of the world outside of the cult is very scary and dangerous and hostile and lethal. And so nothing would be more dangerous to the myopic propaganda of the state than to bring someone to a third world country, like you're saying, and to expose them to the grotesque, morbid consequences of our reckless imperialism. showing people what, even you could even do it internally. You could take somebody who is from a ritzy area and take them to an impoverished area and force them to see the consequences of this catastrophic capitalist competition. They will see, they can go to Laconia, New Hampshire, and they can see what the Great Recession of 2008 did to that community, and they can see what's going to be coming down the pike once the economic consequences of COVID-19 are known. This is a kind of culture shock that has been written about in classical literature, but again, the state in its tyranny and its injustice is predicated on people's ignorance of that underbelly. People have to be kept in the dark about what is actually going on. They have to be told that the society is completely perfect and there's just a few of these wretched people who are trying to undermine it from within. In order to demolish and discredit that myth, you have to give people firsthand experiences of reality. But of course, we can't do that through our education system for the reasons that I've already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll say a quick few things and then I'll ask Dak a question. I lived in Guatemala while studying for my bachelor's for 6 months. Changed me as a person completely. I highly recommend studying abroad if you can do so. Super awesome. I went to Cuba for only a week. And I remember the next time, and this is right before enlisting, the next time I got back, the first time I went to an American grocery store, I felt almost like sad. Like I felt like crying almost, I swear to God. It was just like these places are just so different. And with what's going on in the United States right now, and me thinking about my blackness and like the kind of person that I am so happy to be leaving the United States soon, because instead of like contextualizing me, myself, and my being and who I am in this, like, I guess you would call it mostly white nation of, like, you know, imperialism and war and how we don't take care of our people and we just play the different tribes off each other. I want to see what these Asians are talking about. I want to see if it just feels different. I'm going to be in East Asia, and like I'm just so much looking forward to it. And honestly, I'm a little bit tired of the United States, and I would love to kind of see it from afar. The question that I have for Dak, and I guess like where I want to take this conversation is like, what do you guys think is like what should an optimal education system do? Like the state stuff aside, where the state perpetuates itself and the state sets things up this way on purpose. I mean, what would you guys have the education system do? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not informed on any subject except literature. So obviously I would say that students need to be, well, first of all, they need to be, the lack of literary training and instruction is reflected in Americans' problem of functional illiteracy. I mean, you have so many people in this country who are functionally illiterate, and Twitter doesn't help. The idea that people think they're being informed by watching YouTube videos instead of reading books is a reflection of what's wrong with our society. So with literature being degraded in the broader society and that degradation now taking place within the education system, you don't have much hope for a society that can learn to articulate itself. You don't have hope for a society or for people who can learn to analyze their own actions and thoughts. They can't express their own opinions because they have nothing of their own to say. And so with the demise of literacy in the United States, it would have to begin in the class. Correcting that problem would have to begin in the classroom, because obviously our families are completely incapable of correcting it. They are victims. No, seriously, they are victims of the same society. They are victims of that society of illiteracy, and they are byproducts of it. Therefore, it would have to take place among people who actually know what they're doing, and that's where the education system is supposed to come in, but instead it fails.
That's cold that you mentioned that, you know, watching educational YouTube channels can't play a role.
I didn't say it can't play a role, but I'm saying that there's nobody on YouTube who...
It shouldn't be the only thing you do.
There's nobody on YouTube who will impart to you nearly as much wisdom as Plato, Nietzsche, Rousseau, Aristotle, etc. People who have not read those writers and then profess to understand the fundamental problems in our society I can't take that kind of ignorance masquerading as opinion seriously.
Yeah, certain subjects, I think the basics should be taught, and then there's others that should always be taught. For example, what Dak is bringing up, teaching books by philosophers like the authors he just mentioned, Nietzsche, Plato, and also, like we were talking earlier, teaching about spirituality, teaching about meditation, also teaching about the systematics of our politics so that we can think more systematically rather than getting distracted with surface level issues. So I think we can continue this next time. There's a lot to talk about here. I would also love to hear what Christy has to say about this, since you guys always talk about really interesting subjects over at Dak's channel and at Dee Pierce's channel. So thank you guys again for coming on. There's a lot more to be discussed, but unfortunately I gotta go. So thank you guys again for coming on. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Dee Pierce SSC. Subscribe to Dak. He's almost there with 1,000 subscribers. So make sure you subscribe to his
Even
channel.
as I keep losing Twitter followers. I love it.
All right, take care, everybody. Don't forget to stay informed. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.